At her wedding reception, the worst words cut through the lantern light as if they were knives. Emma froze by the head table, feeling the world tilt beneath her feet. White roses glowed like candles. Guests whispered behind lifted glasses. A string quartet paused mid-melody. The air grew thick with expectation and dread. Emma's heart thundered in her chest with every slow second. She wanted to vanish into the night. She wanted to wake from a cruel dream. Emma had spent years searching for a place to belong, and tonight she stood in an ivory gown that felt heavier than stone. Since her mother's death, she had lived in the shadow of her father Robert's distant nods. 6 months ago, he had remarried Victoria and brought the stepdaughter Lily into their home. Victoria moved through rooms with a poised grace that masked cold intent. Her gentle compliments carried hidden barbs. She praised Emma's cooking, but with a tilt of her head that hinted at mockery. She admired Emma's dress, but with narrowed eyes that measured every stitch. The morning had begun in Emma's childhood bedroom, where pale sunlight filtered through lace curtains. She touched an antique dresser once owned by her mother and saw the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. A framed note lay by the mirror in faded childlike script, reminding her that she was braver than she knew. Emma slipped it into her bouquet as a secret talisman. Beneath her carefully applied makeup, she felt a tremor of uncertainty. She reminded herself that she was strong. She reminded herself that tonight she would marry Michael, the man who had shown her what real love looked like. Downstairs, the kitchen was tense. Victoria had arrived early and occupied a chair by the table, arranging fresh flowers with a studied elegance. She spoke in a tone that dipped low, yet carried enough volume for everyone to hear that it must feel wonderful to wear white and feel beautiful, even if only for a day. Emma's fork hovered over a slice of toast. She forced a polite nod and kept her gaze on the jam. Robert leaned against the window frame, arms folded. He offered only a brief glance and said that she looked ready without any hint of pride in his voice. Emma pressed her lips together and let the words wash over her. The drive to the venue passed in a blur of passing streets and receding doubts. Michael reached for her hand at a stoplight and squeezed it gently. He offered a reassuring smile in the rearview mirror, and Emma allowed herself a small flicker of calm. He had met her 3 years ago at a volunteer event for foster children. He organized art supplies while she led a writing workshop. He had joked that she looked like someone who believed in lost causes. She had laughed then, and something had shifted inside her chest. Now they were headed toward a promise they meant to keep. Under a white arbor in a garden bathed in afternoon light, Emma and Michael exchanged vows that trembled with emotion. Emma had felt Michael's tears when he spoke of her kindness and courage. She had felt her own resolve strengthen as she repeated words she had practiced in secret. The moment felt sacred and fragile, like the surface of a calm lake that might shatter at any breath. They signed the register and walked back down the aisle hand in hand as husband and wife. Applause rippled through the guests like gentle rain. For a heartbeat, Emma believed that everything had changed. The reception hall was draped in white linen and soft lantern light. Tables lined the room, glowing beneath strings of tiny bulbs. A gentle breeze drifted in from open windows, carrying the scent of late summer flowers. Emma took her place at the head table, seated between Michael and her Aunt Marlene, one of the few relatives on her mother's side who had shown up. Marlene reached across the table and offered a reassuring squeeze to Emma's hand. Emma returned, the gesture with a grateful smile, and allowed a flicker of warmth to bloom inside her. Plates of salad and bread were passed around. Guests clinked glasses and shared laughs. Emma raised a glass of sparkling water in a quiet toast to new beginnings, before sipping slowly. She tried to anchor herself in these moments of light and genuine joy. But under the hum of friendly chatter, she felt a ripple of tension. She saw Victoria lean toward Marlene, lowering her voice, but not enough. Victoria declared that Emma was only pretending to be loved, that it was all an act to win sympathy. The words landed in the air like stones. Guests stilled. Marlene froze, mid-forkful. A hollow laugh rang out next. Robert joined in as though it had been a private joke shared with friends. He shook his head and suggested that Michael must have felt pity enough to show up. His laughter echoed in Emma's ears. Her world spun. The warm glow of lanterns turned harsh and cold. Chairs scraped the floor and glassware rattled under trembling hands. Emma felt her cheeks burn, her throat tighten, and her vision narrow to a pinpoint. She could no longer breathe. Without looking back, Emma rose abruptly and pushed her chair away. The scrape of wood on tile sounded like thunder. She walked through stunned rows of guests whose murmurs rose behind her like a wave. She passed tables set for celebration. She passed the band, pausing mid-song, and saw eyes wide in disbelief. Each step felt heavy but urgent. She reached the terrace door and stepped into the cool night air. Outside, the terrace was hushed, except for the soft hum of the reception behind her. Lantern light spilled onto the stone floor and cast long shadows. Emma leaned against a railing and pressed her hands to her chest as though the beat of her heart might spill out. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of night jasmine, carrying a trace of innocence from childhood memories. She remembered her mother humming at the stove, stirring tomato sauce with gentle hands. She remembered the smell of basil and the warm laughter that once filled every corner of this world. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned long ago that grief could be still and silent and deadly. She would not give anyone the sight of her brokenness. She pressed her forehead against the cool stone and tried to steady her breath. She saw flashes of her mother's note reminding her of bravery. She felt a tremor of strength rise inside her chest, like the first buds of spring pushing through frozen ground. Footsteps on stone made her lift her head. Michael emerged into the glow of lanterns. He paused at the terrace threshold as though weighing his next move. He crossed the space without a word and slipped an arm around her shoulders. His coat lay across her gown, offering warmth and comfort. Emma leaned into him and felt the steady rise and fall of his chest. He did not speak pity. He did not offer hollow apologies. He offered presence. Together, they walked back into the hall. The music began again softly, and the guests shifted in their seats. Michael moved with purpose toward the microphone that stood by the bandstand. Chairs creaked as people turned to watch. Emma followed at his side, her pulse pounding like a drum. The air crackled with expectation. She saw Victoria's lips part in shock, and Robert's eyes flick to the stage. Aunt Marlene reached for Emma's hand and squeezed it tight. Michael cleared his throat, and the string quartet fell silent. A hush spread across the room thick enough to taste. Emma stood just behind him as the crowd leaned in. Michael spoke, with calm conviction that echoed in every corner without reliance on hollow apologies or angry reproaches. He spoke of Emma's strength, her unwavering kindness, and her capacity to love deeply, even when the world gave back only pain. He held up a small framed note that Emma recognized at once as the one her mother had blessed on her 7th birthday. The ink was faded, but the words were still clear, reminding her that she was braver than she knew. Michael explained how Emma had carried more sorrow than most of them could imagine, and yet had shown compassion to strangers at her lowest moments. The room remained still as an entire generation of old judgments fell away. Then applause bloomed like thunder rolling through the hall. It started soft and grew into a roar of affirmation and respect. Emma felt tears slip free as she stepped forward to stand beside Michael. Their hands met, and they shared a look filled with truth and triumph. Guests rose to their feet. Aunt Marlene wept with joy. Friends surrounded her with hugs and whispered words of pride and love. Emma felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to find Victoria and Robert seated in stunned silence, their faces pale as if the air had been ripped from the room. Their cruelty had failed. Music swelled in a brighter key, and the crowd returned to dancing and laughter. Emma and Michael moved among their friends as a new light shimmered in the lantern glow. Emma felt the lace of her gown brush against her skin as she twirled under the strings of bulbs. She laughed without self-consciousness for the first time in years. Later, Emma slipped out to the terrace with the note her mother had written. She read the words again under the lantern glow and let their power settle deep into her bones. She tucked the note into her clutch, a secret promise of strength she would carry forever. Emma stepped back inside with her head high and her heart open. The reception pulsed with genuine joy and celebration. She knew that this chapter of her life would be remembered not for the betrayal, but for the moment when her dignity rose triumphant in full view of everyone she loved and everyone who had doubted her.
Emma's breath caught as the shape in the doorway solidified. In the muted glow of the bulb, she saw the contours of his face. His eyes held both recognition and guarded distance. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Present and past collided in a single heartbeat. Then the moment shattered and the scene slipped away into darkness. She stood once more beside a long oak table in a cramped precinct office. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Files lay stacked in neat piles, though the edges frayed with age. Sophia hovered at the threshold, shoulders hunched, guilt etched into every line of her face. She had been a detective then, sharp and relentless. But that evening she had looked away. A flash of memory showed Emma pressing photographs of Daniel into Sophia's hand. He had disappeared during an undercover assignment. Sophia had promised pursuit, but hours turned into days, and days into weeks. The case file closed without resolution. Emma had watched the formality of the report seal her husband's fate before her eyes. In that moment, Sophia had forsaken a friend and a promise. The precinct vanished in a pulse of wind, and Emma found herself under the same street lamp where she had discovered Daniel's jacket. Present reality dripped around her like spilled paint. She turned and hurried back into the building as though pursuing a fleeing shadow. Each footstep echoed Sophia's earlier apology that had never been spoken aloud. A sudden jolt of remorse rippled through her chest. She would need Sophia's help now. She found the former detective in a shabby apartment above a shuttered bakery. The windows were boarded, and the air held the scent of stale flour and regret. Sophia opened the door without a word, her eyes red, from sleepless nights, filled with the same nightmares that tormented Emma. The room was sparse. A single desk bore a small lamp, and beneath it lay a map, scrawled with routes and names. Names Emma recognized: Victor Crane, Iris Morgan, Lucas Drake. Without hesitation, Emma produced the photograph and the envelope from her pocket. Sophia's hands trembled as she examined the image of Daniel in a dimly lit warehouse. The detective swallowed hard and nodded. No words passed, but the shared resolve bridged the gap of years. They moved as one toward the map, tracing crimson lines that punched through the black ink like veins. In a sudden lapse, the narrative leapt backward again. A dusty courtroom in 2012. Daniel had stood before a judge. Lank hair, brushed behind his ears, guilt mingled with fear in his eyes. He had been caught transporting a crate of foreign contraband. He claimed duress, whispers of threats made by unseen men. The judge had sentenced him to probation and therapy, but whispers of a darker undercurrent swirled in the gallery. That afternoon, his brother Lucas had promised to keep their father's name clear. Lucas's handshake had quivered. Back in the present, Sophia slid open a heavy cabinet door in the auto shop at the city's edge. Corroded oil drums and abandoned tools framed the space. A single shaft of light pierced a dusty window and illuminated a hidden compartment. Heart pounding, Emma reached in and extracted a slim flash drive engraved with her name. Her breath trembled as she turned it over. Symbols edged the metal casing, a phoenix rising from coals and an Ouroboros devouring its tail. Emma traced the grooves with her fingertip. The symbols pulsed with promise of both death and rebirth. Suddenly, Sophia's flashlight flickered. The beam landed on scattered papers and photographs strewn across the workbench. One photograph showed Daniel and Victor Crane locked in a tense handshake. Another revealed Iris Morgan handing a sealed envelope to Daniel at dusk. And there was Nate, his haunted stare fixed on the camera as though challenging the viewer to Uncover the truth. A harsh scrape echoed from the back of the shop. Shadows danced across the walls. Emma's pulse spiked. She and Sophia exchanged a glance heavy with unspoken fear. Then a gunmetal reflection glinted among the tools, and they both stiffened. Sophia raised her hand, an unspoken signal to retreat. They slipped into the doorway as the door creaked open behind them. In the sudden darkness, Emma felt the weight of the flash drive against her heart. The symbols seemed to burn through her skin. She sensed that her entire life hinged on the data within. She remembered Daniel's vow that he would always protect her, even if it meant faking his own death. And she felt a new resolve harden, like forged steel. Footsteps clattered on concrete, and voices murmured beyond the threshold. Emma pressed closer to Sophia. The detective's eyes met hers, fierce and determined. Their alliance formed in a shared betrayal and guilt. Together, they ducked through a side door into a dim alley where neon signs flickered across damp bricks. The world outside seemed oblivious to the conspiracy unfolding beneath its surface. Above them, a single star peered through the storm clouds. It shone like a distant promise. Emma slid the flash drive into her pocket and rose to her full height. Memories of candlelit vigils and silent pleas at the grave intertwined with this moment of defiance. She would drag the truth into the open, no matter the cost. A sudden rush of adrenaline pulled her forward. Sophia's hand found hers and squeezed. No words were necessary. They moved as one into the night, shadows trailing at their heels. In the space between past and present, Emma felt the stirrings of hope. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she embraced the promise of redemption as the rain washed the city clean.
At 21, James Butler Hickok was already carving his destiny. Before the world knew him as Wild Bill, he was a fearless young man, destined to become one of the deadliest gunslingers in the West.
Emma emerged from the freight yard beneath a sky bruised by midnight clouds. Dripping asphalt reflected neon signs that flickered like dying fireflies. Her coat clung to her curves, soaked through by cold rain. Beside her, Sophia led the way, toward the abandoned train station where Lieutenant Harris waited. The station's grand arch loomed overhead, its broken windows resembling hollow eyes. A lone street lamp cast a thin beam across discarded tickets and rusted rails. Emma recalled the first time she had driven past this place, unaware of the labyrinth beneath its facade. Tonight, it would serve as a sanctuary or a tomb. Memory cut abruptly to a precinct conference room in 1999. Sophia sat at the head of a long table, case files stacked like silent sentinels. Daniel's name appeared in bold on the top file. Weeks after his disappearance, she had closed the investigation, convinced she could not unravel the shadows that consumed him. Emma had watched through frosted glass as the detective turned away, shoulders tense with regret. That moment had forged a fissure of guilt that Sophia carried to this day. Present reality returned in the cold air of the station. Lieutenant Harris stood beneath a crumbling arch, half his face concealed in shadow. He held the armored case as though it contained the sum of his convictions. Emma approached and extended her hand, the flash drive heavy in her palm. Harris accepted it without a word, his eyes flickering to the phoenix symbol etched on the metal. The rising emblem of death and rebirth glowed beneath a thin layer of grime. Emma sensed his doubts, the weight of trusting a widow chasing ghosts. Then memory fractured again to a windswept rooftop at dawn. Iris knelt among broken tiles, cradling a cracked family photograph. Her voice had trembled in confession, though words scattered like ash in the breeze. Crane's promise of debt relief had taken her from orphanages to hidden docks. Each envelope she passed had felt like a betrayal of her better self. She had believed she controlled the arrangement until it began to unravel lives. In the station, Emma stepped aside as Harris opened the armored case. He placed the flash drive into a secure slot and sealed it with a mechanical click. Sparks from a distant generator crackled behind them. Sophia watched with narrowed eyes. Emma felt a surge of tension when Harris glanced at her jacket pinned to her bag. The leather cuff bore 5 faint puncture marks, a symbol of battles waged. In silence. Flashback. Lucas in twilight 2 summers ago, pacing before a cracked mirror. He touched the scar over his right eyebrow and recalled their father's warning that family secrets must remain buried. He had promised to shield Emma from the truth about Daniel's coerced complicity. His voice had been firm, though fear trembled beneath each vow. Back in the station, the doors groaned shut. Emma swallowed as the artificial light flickered. She did not notice Sophia's glance toward the digital clock overhead. 1 a.m. spelled danger in every tick. Harris gestured toward a side exit where a narrow corridor led down to old service tunnels. Emma drew a brittle map from her coat pocket, its edges soaked. Lucas's handwriting scrawled coordinates in charcoal pencil. She slipped it back into her pocket without a second thought. Another memory Nate in a makeshift clinic on a desert base, counting breaths in exhaustion. The war had hollowed him like driftwood. When Crane had offered him a mission to protect his brother in exchange for secrets, he had believed purpose would follow. Instead, he found the burden of loyalty heavier than any rifle. Present moment, Emma, and Sophia descended chipped concrete steps into a yawning tunnel. Water dripped from overhead pipes, plinking like distant drums. The air smelled of oil, rust, and old despair. Shadows pooled against the walls, shifting as they passed. Emma ran her fingertip across the map's coordinates. Something felt off, but she could not place it. Abrupt recollection. Emma kneeling at her mother's grave in 1994. Candles flickering at the footstone. She had whispered promises of protection she could not keep. Night after sleepless night, she had prayed for forgiveness that never came. They pressed onward, until a faint glow appeared at the end of the corridor. Sophia eased to the side, revealing a heavy steel door warped by time. A keypad blinked with erratic orange light. Harris placed a palm on the scanner. The door groaned open, revealing a triangular room lined with filing cabinets and flaking plaster. He flicked on a lamp mounted near the ceiling. Inside, crates marked with Crane's insignia lay scattered across a dusty floor. Emma crossed the threshold and spotted the leather jacket draped over a crate. It hung like a mournful banner, its phoenix symbol twisted by dirt. She closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe. Beneath the lamp's cone of light, a metal case sat on a plywood table. It bore the engraving of a snake devouring its tail. Memory, cut to Daniel in a smoky back room of a warehouse in 2012. He had worn this jacket when he made the deal that doomed him. His voice had cracked in apology to a man he barely recognized. The transaction had bound him to Crane's world. Each nickel and foreign artifact labeled him as traitor and savior, in equal measure. In the present, Emma approached the case. Harris watched through narrowed eyes. Sophia's hand hovered near her sidearm. Emma lifted the case and felt its weight shift beneath her fingers. The Ouroboros seemed to pulse beneath the surface. She remembered every flash of betrayal and every moment of hope woven into that metal shell. Suddenly, a distant clatter echoed in the tunnel. Boots on concrete. Voices rose in low murmurs. Emma's pulse quickened. She pressed her body against the cold wall and felt the rough texture of old bricks bite into her palm. Sophia silently drew her weapon and nodded at Emma. The lieutenant raised his brow and stepped toward the door, weapon at the ready. Memory flickered to Iris weeping behind a shuttered window in a dilapidated flat. She had risked her life to send Daniel a map of the smuggling ring's safe house. Her tears had bitten through the night in silence. She had believed redemption lay in sacrifice. Back in the tunnel, Harris opened the steel door. A beam of light spilled into the corridor and revealed two figures standing at the entrance. One wore fatigues and carried a rifle in a loose grip. The other held a battered duffel bag. Emma's breath caught. Nate's haunted eyes met hers in recognition. Beside him, Iris held up an empty hand in peace, guilt etched into every line of her face. Dawn broke over the city in muted lavender and ash, as Emma led the small procession from the station's archway into deserted streets. The lone train whistle faded into the distance, and rain trickled from broken eaves onto puddles that mirrored neon ghosts. Each footstep echoed hollow promises in the silent avenue. Emma's leather jacket, damp and heavy, clung to her like a second skin. Beside her, Sophia's gaze remained fixed on the rear-view shadows. Late Harris brought up the rear, his armored case slung across one shoulder. Nate and Iris moved together, wary sentinels in a fractured alliance. Lucas paused beneath a flickering lamp to glance at the broken rails, his scarred brow drawn into thought. Emma's phone buzzed against her hip, its vibration a pulse of tension. She drew it free with a silent breath and stared at the name that haunted her dreams, her father. His voice came through fragile and tremulous, each syllable edged with fear and love. He reminded her of summer afternoons in a sunlit garden, of warm bread and softer laughter before tragedy, his frailty seeping through the line. Emma's grip tightened on the phone as memories rushed in, her mother's funeral under a slate sky, her father's trembling promise that nothing would ever harm her again. She answered with a single nod, though he could not see, her eyes glistening with the weight of separated grief. The call ended too soon, leaving a hollow ache she carried forward like a talisman of guilt. They reached a nondescript courtyard behind a shuttered bakery, where Harris led them through a rusted gate into a winding alley. Graffiti bled across cinderblock walls as though the city itself had bled secrets onto concrete. Sophia's flashlight carved a path through darkness. Emma swallowed rainwater and resolve before following. The scent of damp earth and oil lingered as they entered a low building tucked between a collapsed colonnade and a stack of abandoned crates. Inside, a single bulb hummed overhead, illuminating a chipped wooden table and a row of filing cabinets whose drawers rattled like rusted teeth. Seated at the table was Agent Mendez of the Covert Anti-Corruption Unit. His features were angular, eyes sharpened by endless interrogations. He regarded Emma and her companions without a greeting, as though they were pieces on a chessboard. Harris set the armored case before him with a metallic thud. Emma stepped forward and withdrew the metal, case engraved with the Ouroboros symbol. With a careful tilt, she opened its latch and revealed the slim flash drive and the digital recorder she carried. Mendez leaned in, fingers brushing the phoenix rising from coals etched on the drive's casing. He lifted the recorder and pressed its button once, listening to Emma's vow carried on static and rain. A flash of memory cut the moment in two. Emma knelt at Daniel's grave beneath a weeping willow 2 autumns past. Candlelight danced on the damp grass as she whispered promises of justice to a silent headstone. She vowed to carry his burden when he could not, to bring redemption to the man she lost and the empire he served against his will. The memory faded as Mendez placed the recorder on the table and locked eyes with Emma. He studied her as though weighing the gravity of her sacrifice. There was no mercy in his glance, only the cold calculus of law and consequence. Mendez tapped the armored case and spoke in a measured tone that carried both threat and assurance. He would provide forged passports and new identities, safe passage beyond the border, in exchange for unredacted access to every file on the drive and a formal testimony against Victor Crane's syndicate. Emma accepted the terms with a single steady nod, the phoenix symbol at her fingertips pulsing with both hope and finality. A sudden crack of thunder rumbled through the alley as Mendez slid a manila folder across the table. It contained passports, bearing unfamiliar names and photographs that were their own but not their own, forged lives built on ink and lamination. Beneath the folder lay plane tickets for a clandestine flight at midnight to a remote airstrip across the mountains. Emma's pulse quickened as she scanned the details, each word sealing a pact of escape and uncertainty. Flashback again to Daniel in a sterile therapy room 2 years earlier. He had traced the carved phoenix on his journals and confessed the depth of Crane's coercion. His voice had trembled as he spoke of threats against Emma, of the night he faked his death to keep her safe. The therapist had offered gentle nods and final reassurances that Daniel could rebuild his integrity. In that silence, he had found both a path to redemption and the terror of living under a new kind of spotlight. Back in the safe house, Emma closed the folder and slipped the documents into her rucksack. Sophia exhaled a breath she did not realize she held and touched Emma's arm in solidarity. Lucas stepped forward then, chin bowed, and produced the charcoal map he had hidden beneath his coat. Its coordinates were crossed out, replaced by a single word scrawled in haste: trust. He had misled Crane's men to spare Emma, sacrificing his own safety for hers. Emma met his gaze and nodded, forgiveness and gratitude shining through tears she refused to shed. Iris and Nate hovered at the edge of the room, hesitation and hope flickering across their faces. Iris extended a trembling hand toward Emma, offering loyalty reborn from guilt. Nate's haunted stare softened into resolve as he eased his hand from the rifle slung across his back. Emma gathered them close in a circle of weary survivors. She acknowledged them with a gesture that spoke forgiveness and acceptance. Each breath they shared in that room was a testament to resilience born from shattered faith. As midnight approached, the group moved toward a waiting twin-propeller plane parked beneath a skeletal hangar. Rain had returned in a soft drizzle that turned asphalt into quicksilver. The pilot, cloaked in shadows, handed them sealed envelopes containing their new names and last-minute instructions. Emma accepted hers and slipped it into her jacket. She turned and gathered her companions, their silhouettes ghostly against floodlights that trembled like distant stars. A sudden gust rattled the hangar doors and carried a faint echo of Crane's empire still lurking in the city's underbelly. Emma's chest tightened as she stepped onto the plane's metal stairs, each rivet tapping out a promise of both escape and peril. She looked back once at the rain-slick runway, at the city she would leave behind. Then she climbed aboard, each movement propelled by the weight of memories and the promise of rebirth.
Anna woke before dawn, the air in her apartment cool and still. A thin strip of pale light crept under the curtains. In the quiet, she could hear the faint hum of city traffic, like distant waves on a shoreline. Today would be the most challenging day she had faced in months. The day she would present the pilot results of her expansion plan to the executive board and simultaneously manage a critical emergency at one of her top home service clients. She rose and moved through the apartment, on silent feet. The kitchen light glowed softly. A single pancake lay on a plate, half-eaten, remnants of Maya's breakfast earlier. The small drawing taped to the fridge, 2 figures under a bending umbrella, seemed to watch her with gentle encouragement. Anna took a deep breath and let the memory of that umbrella carry her through the morning tasks. At 6 a.m, she led a video call with her operations team. Faces lit by laptop screens appeared in neat squares. The lead coordinator spoke of a power outage at a mansion her crew was servicing. Backup plans had failed. The client's event was scheduled to begin in less than 3 hours. Anna's pulse quickened. She recalled a lesson from early in her career. When plans break down, clarity and decisive action must fill the gap, and Sibiu instructed her team to reroute 2 crews from a smaller assignment and to dispatch emergency generators. She set precise deadlines. One crew would arrive in 45 minutes, the other in 1 hour and 15 minutes. Then she hung up and sprinted to her home office, grabbing the folder with her expansion pilot data. The digital clock glowed 7:15 in the morning. Her next meeting started at 9. The flashback came unbidden. She was back in her first office job, seated at a tiny desk under fluorescent lights. A sudden power cut had plunged the cubicle into darkness. Phones went silent. The office manager panicked. Anna had found a flashlight and guided her coworkers to safety. In that moment, she discovered that leadership was not about titles. It was about seeing needs before they were voiced. That memory bolstered her now. At 8:30, she stepped into the elevator of the corporate tower. The polished brass doors reflected her face set in calm determination. Rain began to patter against the windows in soft, rhythmic taps. She gripped the folder and felt the weight of every number, every chart, every pilot metric she had painstakingly gathered. Each page represented hours of data collection from her own crews, on-time rates, client satisfaction scores, cost efficiencies, new revenue generated. The executive boardroom lay at the top floor. She entered to find the same stern faces from the previous meeting. The rain streaked the windows behind them, casting long, wavering reflections on the marble table. Anna laid out her binder, arranged her notes, and found the one seat that aligned her with the window view of the city skyline. In that vantage, she felt both small and infinite. Small, because she was one voice among many. Infinite, because the city's lights reminded her of countless possibilities. She began without speaking aloud. She let her presence command the room as she placed the first chart on the table. It showed a month of pilot operations with her 15 crews maintaining quality standards above 95% and generating a profit margin of 25%. The board members leaned forward. One executive tapped a finger on the dark wood. She recalled the memory of the early morning pancake routine. Anna had learned that small acts build trust. In the same way, consistent service builds credibility. Then, Anna stood at the edge of the balcony as dawn broke over the city. The sky was painted in soft strands of rose and gold, a promise of renewal after long nights of storm. The rooftop below was quiet now. Chairs and tables sat abandoned like witnesses to the celebration that had once trembled with tension and triumph. In that stillness, she felt the weight of every moment she had lived. 2011 in a cramped cubicle. The first boardroom meeting under flickering lights. The night of the mansion power outage, the whispered counsel of her mentor, the laughter that once cut her chest like glass. Each memory formed stones in the path she now walked. She pressed her fingers against the cold metal railing. The texture was rough where paint had chipped, a small contrast in the otherwise perfect world of glass and steel. the imperfection reminded her that nothing was flawless. Growth came through fractures, resilience born in the gaps where doubt once lived. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift backward. The earliest morning she could recall saw her shivering in a hand-me-down, coat at a school bus stop. Maya was 3 then, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one arm and Anna's hand with the other. The air had been crisp, each breath a puff of white mist. They had arrived at school early because Anna's first office job began before sunrise. She had kissed Maya's forehead and whispered that she would build a better world for them both. In that cold flicker of time, she had found the ember of resolve that fueled every early morning since. The flashback dissolved into a scene of Anna, pacing the hallway of the corporate tower the day before her promotion party. She had been in that corridor of glass once before, trembling at the door handle. Then, as now, the world had pressed in with its polished expectations. But she had claimed her voice and stepped through. The difference now was that she no longer needed permission. The present wind carried a faint scent of coffee and rain. Anna inhaled deeply and turned toward the far end of the balcony, where a small table held a single blue-rimmed mug. Her mentor had left it there overnight, a quiet gesture that said, "Follow your own rhythm." She picked it up and felt its warmth despite the chilled air. The steam curled like a ribbon of memory. Another scene surfaced. Anna alone in her living room, journal. Open, midnight oil burning. She had written the words that now echoed in her mind. True strength is shown when the world demands you bow and you choose to stand. In those pages she had poured doubts, hopes, fears, and dreams. The pen had traced a map of her own becoming, a blueprint she had followed through every trial. A sudden gust of wind tugged at her hair, and the blue mug clattered against the table. Anna caught it instinctively. The sound startled her, as if the world were reminding her to stay present. She set the mug down and let her eyes sweep the city below. Streets awakened with traffic. Office lights blinked off one by one as workers emerged for the new day. In that sprawling mosaic, she saw parallels to her life. Patterns of light and shadow, quiet corners and bright avenues. Behind her, the sliding door opened softly. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the pale glow of the suite's interior. No words passed. They shared a look that conveyed years of shared struggle and silent triumph. Rebecca's gaze held pride mixed with anticipation, as though she saw not just this moment, but the unfolding trajectory of Anna's future. Anna nodded and led the way back inside. The suite was sparsely furnished. 2 leather chairs, a small desk, and the desk lamp that looked as though it had witnessed countless late-night sessions. On the desk lay an envelope addressed to Anna in precise block letters. She opened it and found a single sheet of paper. On it was an offer: joint leadership of a new division combining her home services firm and Rebecca's corporate network. The proposal detailed shared equity, aligned values, and a vision for scaling with integrity. Her breath caught. She read the lines again, each phrase landing like a stepping stone toward a horizon she had only glimpsed in dreams. This twist, an offer she had not solicited, felt both incredible and daunting. Her mind drifted to the betrayal she had once endured when a partner demanded shortcuts. She recalled the hollow ache and the slow rebuild that followed. The contrast between that cutthroat moment and this new chance burned bright in her chest. Anna looked up at Rebecca. A single nod passed between them, a silent accord born of trust. She folded the paper and slipped it into her journal, where future plans and past reflections coexisted in inked harmony. In that act, she sealed her choice: to accept joint leadership, to blend her independent spirit with the resources of a global corporation, and to steer a course defined by values rather than by profit alone. They left the suite together and descended in the elevator, side by side. The polished doors opened into a hallway where the cleaning crews were already at work, restoring the lounge to its neutral state. As Anna passed the empty tables and scattered petals, she felt the lingering echo of applause still resonating in the marble walls. The space held both her ascent and her reclamation. Back on the ground floor, Anna stepped into the lobby and paused to look at her reflection in a brass plaque. For a moment, she saw the shy assistant she once was, eyes averted, voice barely a whisper. That figure seemed distant now, like a character in someone else's story. She reached out and touched the plaque, as if offering gratitude. "Thank you for carrying me here." Outside, Maya waited by the fountain in the plaza. The child's backpack rested on her small shoulders. When she saw Anna emerging, she ran forward, arms wide. Anna knelt and caught her in an embrace that shimmered with relief, pride, and boundless love. The umbrella Maya held bobbed gently in its handle. Together they opened it and stepped into the soft drizzle, letting the water bead on the fabric and roll to the ground. In that simple gesture, the narrative found its resolution. The umbrella bent only slightly, but it held firm. It was the perfect emblem of their journey, resilience in the face of wind.